26.68 kmpl. That is the claimed fuel economy of this new Maruti Suzuki Celerio, and it is India's most fuel efficient petrol car. But the new Celerio is much more than just that headline figure. There's a new engine, there's a new platform, fresh interiors, fresh styling. There's so much going on with this little hatchback. What's it like to drive? Let's head behind the wheel and find out. But before we do that, make sure you like this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the Evo India channel and leave a comment down below. What do you think of how the new Celerio looks? Now let's start by talking about the engine. This engine is codenamed K10C, and if you remember, the old one was codenamed K10B. Now what the C means is there are a few changes that have been done to make this a more efficient engine. The big changes are firstly dual injectors, so better fueling. There's VVT, which has been added, variable valve timing, and there's an integrated exhaust manifold. Those are the big changes, and the idea behind all of this is to optimize the mechanical losses. So there have been tweaks to the valve train, there have been tweaks to the timing chain, the oil which is used in the engine has been changed, the viscosity, and all of that has been done to smoothen out the mechanical losses and consequently make the engine more efficient. And that's part of the reason why this car has such a big fuel economy number. But technicals aside, what does the engine feel like? Now this is a 3-cylinder motor. It makes 66 bhp, 89 Nm of torque. That's decent numbers, nothing great, but I'll tell you what, it's not the numbers that stand out about this engine, but it's the way it feels. This is a 3-cylinder engine, but it's really smooth, really refined. You know, you get into the car and you don't think that this is a 3-cylinder engine. It's not the first thing that strikes you. One of the reasons why that has happened is because the engine mountings have changed. This new hardtech platform, it mounts the engine onto the chassis differently, and that new mounting actually absorbs a lot of the NVH that the old platform didn't. But what's it like to drive? Like I said, smooth, refined, but also punchy. There's a nice strong mid-range, so you don't have to rev the daylights out of the engine to really get the best performance out of it. It's a very easy motor to extract performance from. It's very comfortable at slow speeds, at city speeds. At slightly higher speeds, it's capable. I got it up to 100 kilometers an hour on the highway, no stress. It doesn't feel strained at all. Beyond that, maybe 120, it does start feeling a little strain in 5th gear, but you can easily drive it on the highway 80, 100 kilometers an hour, no stress at all. In the city, it's super quiet, super refined, very easy to drive. The manual gearbox, if you pick the manual, is extremely smooth, very easy to shift. The clutch action is light. It's all so easy to use. I think that's the biggest highlight of this drivetrain. Meanwhile, the AMT is also a very nice unit. It's so much better than the AMTs of the past. The head toss effect, it's well controlled. It's not as bad as it used to be on older AMTs. And if you're not demanding too much of the drivetrain, if you're not asking for hard acceleration or fast downshifts, the AMT is perfectly fine. In city traffic, it creeps fine. It's all very, very convenient. If you do want to drive the car a little enthusiastically, though the Celerio is not a car that you want to drive enthusiastically, the manual is a better choice just because it gives you that control over the drivetrain. Apart from that, the AMT is very good. Another interesting thing that Maruti Suzuki has engineered into this car, which again helps a small way in fuel economy, is the stop-start system. So you can turn it on or off from this button over here, but when it's on, it's pretty non-intrusive. So you pull up to a stoplight, you put your foot on the brake and the engine will kill itself. And as soon as you let off the brake and get back onto the throttle, the engine fires back to life and you set off. It's very smooth, very refined. There's no SHVS mild hybrid system here working with the start-stop, but it works fine on its own. Now let's talk about the platform. This is an all-new platform for the Celerio. It's the Gen 5 hardtech platform. Basically shares its same philosophy with the Swift, the Desire. In fact, the Celerio shares a lot in common with the current generation WagonR. You look at the wheelbase, you look at the track widths, they are the same. So essentially, this is underpinned by the same WagonR platform. Now, what does that mean for the way it drives? For starters, ride comfort. It's really, really good. The way the Celerio is set up is soft. It's very comfortable over small bumps, over bad patches of road. Actually, even over bigger bumps at lower speeds, the Celerio is very good. You can just rumble through bad patches of road. Just look at this. No stress whatsoever. You can just potter over it and it absolutely carries on without complaint. The ride quality is really one of the highlights of the car. It's very comfortable, and Indian buyers will appreciate that because our roads are terrible, and for the most part, it's very comfortable. If I do have to criticize the ride quality, I would say that over sharper bumps and at slightly higher speeds over sharper bumps, you can get a lot of suspension noise into the cabin. So you'll crash over a bump and it'll feel like a big thud on the damper, and that's not a very comforting feeling. It's not a very pleasant feeling. So that would be my only real criticism of the ride quality of the car. Now, the converse of that is the handling. So this is obviously set up for comfort and it's a little squidgy and soft. So the handling was never going to be great. It was never going to be a great handling car. That said, it's not bad. Okay, it does everything that you need to most of the time particularly fine. It's not going to thrill you while driving up a winding mountain road, but apart from that, it's fine. The steering is a little dead, it's lifeless. There's no self-centering effect, which is a little annoying because when you turn, you want the steering to self-center a little bit, but that's not happening. It's extremely dead. Something else that I would criticize about it is that at higher speeds, when you're doing fast lane changes, because it's so soft, there's a lot of roll. So suppose you're in a lane and you want to pull out to another lane. If you make a fast, aggressive lane change, it will roll and squat a bit, which is not a very comfortable sensation. But apart from that, if you're not driving it too aggressively, even if you're at high speeds on the highway, it feels very stable, very composed, doesn't feel out of its depths on the highway, and it is a very versatile, usable car, particularly for Indian conditions. So overall, I think it's a car that prioritizes comfort over handling every single day of the week, and that comfort is very apparent. You actually don't mind getting into the Celerio and taking on a bad patch of road. Yes, if you are an enthusiast, you will not enjoy driving the Celerio too much because just that lifeless steering and the fact that the handling chops aren't there. It's more of a baseline handling that just about suits everybody's needs rather than a refined handling experience that will really thrill and engage you. Now, one of the other big changes to the Celerio is on the interiors. The bigger platform has allowed Maruti Suzuki to free up a lot of room on the inside. So it's longer, the wheelbase is longer, that means space is more. Up front, I've got a reasonable amount of room. At the back as well, there was a surprising amount of room with the seat set in my seating position. I was pleasantly surprised. I'd had a few inches free of knee room. Headroom is a little cramped, which was not so great. But apart from that, not too bad at the back. One thing that I do have to criticize about the back is that the window switches are placed in the center ahead. So you've got to stretch out to reach them and they're not conveniently located on the door. They would have been much nicer if they were on the door because then you wouldn't have to stretch. But again, that's nitpicking. Other stuff that you need to know about the back, you've got two 3-point seat belts, but the center belt is a lap belt. Also, you don't have adjustable head restraints. But apart from that, let's get back to the front because there's a lot to talk about here as well. Starting with new infotainment. You've got a 7-inch infotainment screen. This is their new generation infotainment screen, compatible with Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, works very well. It's not too large, but it's adequate and I have really no complaints about it. Apart from that, you've got, again, like the Espresso, you've got window switches on the center console, and in fact the AC controls are identical to the Espressos. Space up front is better as well. You've got the car that's much wider than before, and that width means you're not rubbing shoulders with your passengers. So if you've got a broad guy in the passenger seat, you don't need to worry too much. There's enough room to stretch out inside the cabin, which is nice. In terms of your instrument cluster, you've got a regular analog speedometer, you've got a small digital tachometer. It's all a bit orangey and funky with some fancy graphics and textures. Not exactly my cup of tea. I wouldn't have minded a simpler design, but again, it's not really hurting anybody. It's easy to read, easy to figure out. height adjustable seats. Earlier the seat was not height adjustable and it was a little high up, but now you can adjust that. Combined with the steering wheel that's adjustable for rake, you can actually get into a nice driving position where you're sitting a little inside the car rather than on top of it like before. And I think that adjustability is a good thing, so different people can set it up how they like. Another thing that's improved on the new Celerio is the boot space. So longer rear overhangs on the Celerio means they could free up a little more room in the boot. It's pretty deep and you can actually fit a couple of bags in there. We've got all our equipment and luggage in there right now and it's swallowed up completely. Overnight bags for 3 people, comfortable. Now talking about quality, in this segment you're always going to get hard plastics. There's nothing more you can expect here. That said, the way things are put together here is very good. So if you look at the quality of the aircon vents, you look at the quality of the switches for, say, the emergency hazard lights or the windows or even the knobs for the aircon controls, it all feels very solid, very hefty. It gives you a sense that it's very well built, and that's a nice feeling to have. Nothing feels flimsy, nothing feels cheap. Everything has a nice tactile heft to it, and that is a very nice feeling to have in a car. This is all perceived quality, mind you. It has nothing to do with the actual quality of the car, but it feels good. It makes you feel satisfied with your purchase when you use it. Stuff that's missing on the Celerio that should have been there, I think a rear parking camera should have been there, particularly in the top end trim. You've got the screen, you've got everything, you just need to put the camera in. I don't see why it's not there. Also, automatic climate control. No matter what variant you pick, even if it's this top end ZXi Plus, there's no fancy auto climate control, so there's no auto button. You have to manually adjust and set the aircon system, which I feel is now a little passé. At least top end cars should have got the option of getting auto climate control. Something else that we should talk about is safety. It gets 2 airbags, it gets ABS, it gets EBD, and it also now gets hill hold assist. So if you're parked on a slope, it will not roll. Apart from that, Maruti Suzuki's official word is that it meets and exceeds all current Indian crash regulations, and that's what they're going with. Now, this has not been NCAP tested, so we don't know what it'll crash like, but in terms of safety, that's the equipment that you get. Now, overall, when you look at what the Celerio is, it's essentially an entry-level car, right? It sits one rung above the Alto in Maruti Suzuki's range, so it's still an entry-level hatchback. It's going to be the first car for a lot of people, and in that sense, I think the Celerio does really well for itself. It's a super simple car to drive, you know, it's the kind of car that you can just get into and start driving and not worry about anything. The controls are easy to operate, they're light, the engine is not too tricky to figure out, it's not too tricky to drive smoothly. It's all very simple, well laid out. As long as you're not hustling it, it's very comfortable. The ride quality over our roads is very good, and it's a fuss-free, simple, stress-free car. It's basic, but it's good at what it promises to do, and I think that's the important bit about the Celerio. So what's the verdict on the new Celerio? Now, compared to the last car, it is miles better. It's easier to drive, it's got a nicer engine, it's overall a much more refined, comfortable, spacious experience. Even the interiors, they feel a lot better. In terms of its pricing, it goes head to head with the Tata Tiago. Now, the Tiago offers a slightly different experience. There, the chassis feels a little more tied down. It's a little more of a driver's car. The Tiago engine is not as nice as this, but it's certainly a nicer car to drive. That said, the Celerio does almost everything right for a first-time car buyer. You can just get into it, start the car and drive, no sweat at all. For a first-time car buyer, this is certainly a very enticing option.